Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian, the Three Topics Gamer here to bring you a awesome top 5 favorites list, because this time requested by my awesome Patreon Rain932. He wants to know what are my top 5 favorite Resident Evil games in the series. Now, before I get into my list, I feel like I need to just explain my personal relationship with Resident Evil, just so I can give you guys a warning. And for those of you who are a certain type of fans, give you time to leave the video, because I know that a certain group is not going to like this video. He knows this. They showed up during my Resident Evil 2 remake review, and I'm sure they're going to show up here. But here's my issue with Resident Evil. I did not start playing Resident Evil until, I believe, 2004, when Resident Evil 4 was released on the PlayStation 2. That was my introduction to Resident Evil. And since then, I had played every single Resident Evil game up to, I believe, 6 at that point. Now, it wasn't until after I had beaten 6 that I actually went back and started playing the older games. And when I did that, I absolutely hated them. I hated the original games. I still hate them to this day. I don't like them at all. And once I did even more research on some of these games, my hatred increased even more, because now I understood why those games were the way they were, and I just don't like it. So when it comes to the Resident Evil fan base, I've divided it. I've come up with what I call the generation effect. Basically, there are two types of Resident Evil fans. You're either people who were what I like to call Generation 1 and played every Resident Evil game before Resident Evil 4, and you like those games. And if you like those games, you're gonna hate the older games. And if you're someone like me, who I like to consider myself a Generation 2 fan, I played Resident Evils 4 and on. Although I didn't play 7 because I wanted to avoid that game. And therefore, I liked the later games, and I do not like the older games at all. So, I just wanted to get that out there, because that is how this list is going to be reflected. And I absolutely know for a fact that because of how I feel about the original games, the number 5 spot is going to piss some people off. But this list is based off not only what I think is my personal favorite, but these are the games that I would certainly play before I would play the number 5 spot. Because while the number 5 spot was a great game, and when you really think about where it started and where it ended, I think that Capcom did an incredible thing. But there are still 4 other Resident Evil games that I would certainly play way before touching that game again. And I already know it's gonna piss some people off. I already know that, but I'm not backing down. I am very, very passionate about this. I could care less about other people's feelings and other people's opinions when it comes to how I view the Resident Evil series, which is why, in a very, very rare move, I'm actually going to disable the comment section for this video for at least a few weeks, because I already know the first number of people that are going to see this video are probably going to be Generation 1 fans. I don't think I've heard or met anybody that can openly say that they like every Resident Evil game, because of how drastically different Gen 1 is from Gen 2. It's just they don't mix. You could even almost say that they came from 2 different companies. So I'm telling you, if you are a Resident Evil Generation fan and you love those older games, I recommend you stop the video and leave now, because you will not like this video. But heck, if you're someone like me that started playing Resident Evil with Resident Evil 4 and up, then I would recommend you stay. However, if you like Resident Evil 7, you might be a little bit disappointed, because I've never played Resident Evil 7, and I will refuse to never touch that game ever. But now that I have that disclaimer out of the way, let's start off with this list, and I will be starting off with the number 5 spot on this list. Number 5 on my list is certainly going to piss some people off because of how low it is, but I really don't care, because this is my list, and this spot is reserved for the most recent Resident Evil game that has been released, and that is the Resident Evil 2 Remake. Now, the reason why this game is so low on my list is simply because of one reason. I absolutely hate the entire first third of this game. It is without question the worst section of a Resident Evil game that I've played in 15 years, and it just about embodies every single aspect that I have hated about all of the Resident Evil games that came out before Resident Evil 4 in one section. I went into extensive detail as for why I hated the entire Raccoon Police Department section in my review and its problems, and is the prime reason that why, even though I'm happy to own it and have it as part of my library of games, I will probably not play through this game anytime in the near to distant future. However, once I got past the Raccoon Police Department section, that is when this game made a complete 180 and became a truly amazing game. Visually, this is the best looking Resident Evil game to date, and I love the inclusion of all of the later Resident Evil game gameplay mechanics. The survival aspect is certainly well executed here, and when it comes to the story, while there are certainly a number of inconsistencies that kind of ruin elements to how the overall story is being told between two characters that is certainly present here, it is still very well executed. When I take into notice of what Capcom was able to do by taking a game that I have openly regarded as one of the worst video games that I've ever played, and then they've modified it enough to the point where by the end I felt that outside of the first third of this game it was truly a great title, that is one hell of an accomplishment in my eyes. And even though I know that most people don't have nearly as many problems with this game as I do and have granted high praise, that still just doesn't stop all of the main issues. The first third of this game just hurts this game too much for me to want to revisit it again. All I can do is hope that when we eventually do get the Resident Evil 3 remake, is that Capcom does not repeat the same mistakes as this game did, which is why this game gets the number 5 spot on my list. Number 4 on my list is also going to piss some people off because of how I place it higher than Resident Evil 2 Remake, as many people that I've seen consider this to be one of the worst Resident Evil games, and that is Resident Evil 6. Now, just as I'm sure that there are many individuals that did not experience any of the problems that I did while I was playing the Resident Evil 2 Remake, I would say the exact same thing when it comes to Resident Evil 6, as most of the complaints that I've heard about the game mainly come from older fans, and with me being a Generation 2 fan of the series, I simply did not experience any of these issues that I've heard over the past number of years. Now, this game is far from perfect, but this is a very enjoyable Resident Evil game for me, and I find myself coming back to playing this game several times. I really like how this game finally allowed us to shoot and move at the same time, and with how the controls are, this gave me far better control of my characters than any previous installment that I've played up to this point. I really liked how there are 4 campaigns and each one has a different tone, and even though I personally wasn't a big fan of Chris's campaign, I believe that Leon's campaign was simply incredible outside of a few late bosses. Jake's campaign is pretty solid, bringing us the return of Sherry Birkin, who was just about useless in Resident Evil 2. However, it is nice to see her come back and become a total badass now that she's been inspired by her 2 heroes, Leon and Claire. And Ada just seems to be the right piece to connect all 3 of these solid campaigns together. This game also has my personal favorite version of the classic Mercenaries mode, and with this only being the second best-selling Resident Evil game in the franchise below only Resident Evil 5, some of you may not like this game at all, some of you might even hate it, but you cannot deny its amazing financial success. Number 3 on my list has to go to Resident Evil Revelations. Serving as a prequel to Resident Evil 5, Revelations took a much stronger approach on focusing on a pure horror approach while incorporating the same gameplay mechanics that were used in Resident Evil 5, which includes co-op. With the majority of the game taking place on an abandoned cruiser ship, it added a much more tense environment than other installments. While the original version of this game was released on the 3DS and incorporated the use of both screens, the much more updated HD version, which was released on the consoles, was much more traditional. I think the inclusion of Jill Valentine was a great decision, because outside of a few DLCs and the mercenary modes in Resident Evil 5, this game was really the first true Resident Evil game that gave her a prominent role since Resident Evil 3, and just seeing how this story plays out, which would ultimately lead Jill and Chris to their infamous meeting with Wesker at the Spencer residence, is a delight to see. There are a number of other characters that you will play as over the course of the game, but to me they really didn't add much to this story. But if there is one aspect of this game that for me really helps this game stand apart from any other installment in this franchise, and that is its monster designs. This game has by far the scariest collection of monsters that I've ever seen in any Resident Evil title, and with just how many tight corners and small rooms that you will have to maneuver throughout this cruiser line ship, being stuck in a room with any of these creatures can be a frightening experience. Number 2 on my list goes to the best-selling Resident Evil video game of all time by a wide margin, and that is Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 did for Chris Redfield what Resident Evil 4 did for Leon S. Kennedy, and I must say that not only is this game extremely fun to play, but I would easily consider this to be one of my all-time favorite co-op games of all time. Despite adding a great deal of action elements to this game, they didn't go nearly as extreme as they did in Resident Evil 6, and it still managed to retain a very strong element of survival horror while bringing this series into its 7th generation of gaming. The story presented here, in my opinion, is one of the strongest in the entire franchise, and choosing Africa as the main setting certainly took the franchise out of its traditional elements, but I believe it showed just how much range the franchise could have when executed properly. As a big fan of story-driven video games, I really love just how cinematic this game was able to be, and the performances from all the characters across the board were handled wonderfully. And when it comes to characters, we cannot ignore the fact that Resident Evil 5 brought back the big baddie of the franchise, Albert Wesker, and gave him his most prominent role that he has had in the entire history of the franchise. And for me personally, this is my favorite interpretation of that character. Resident Evil 5 is still a wonderful game even after 10 years, and to me really shows what great change can bring to such a great franchise like Resident Evil. Number 1 on my list is the very first Resident Evil game that I ever played, and that was Resident Evil 4. And despite how much Generation 1 Resident Evil fans have hated all of the changes that the series has gone through over the years, even they cannot deny just how significant Resident Evil 4 was to the series. Resident Evil 4 revolutionized an entire genre of gaming on a level that even to this day we have not seen repeated. And to me personally, this game holds so much significance to me as a gamer. This is a perfect 10 out of 10 game, and I never ever want to see this game be remade in the future. It is only one of 3 games in the history of gaming to legitimately scare me, and if it wasn't for this game, I probably wouldn't even be a Resident Evil fan at all. I owe this game everything, and to my knowledge, this game was the first to introduce the over-the-shoulder game mechanic, which would become a staple to so many franchises that came after this game was released. And just the environment that Resident Evil 4 provides us simply works perfectly with the Resident Evil franchise. There are simply so many incredible things that can be said, and despite the differences between all the generations of Resident Evil fans, this is the one game that can bring us all together, which is why it will always remain my favorite Resident Evil game of all time. And that concludes my list of my top 5 favorite Resident Evil games. Now, I'm sure if there are a number of Generation 1 Resident Evil fans that didn't listen to my warning and stayed to the video, I'm sure you absolutely hate my list, and you know what? I don't really give a damn. It's my list, and these are my favorite Resident Evil games. But heck, maybe some of you guys actually appreciate my list, because it is my personal opinion, and heck, how we experience Resident Evil is probably going to affect how we see the franchise. And heck, that's why I don't shame anyone who likes those older games and hates the newer games. I don't shame them, because I understand where they're coming from, and that is perfectly fine. I respect your opinion, even though chances are you will not respect mine. So that is my list of my top 5 favorite Resident Evil games. Now, if you happen to somewhat like this list, please feel free to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to press that subscribe button to help grow the channel. And heck, if you wait a few weeks, and when I return on the comment section, you'll be free to share your list of your favorite Resident Evil games, because I just want to get that first group of negativity, guys. I want to get them out of the way first before I let the people that are actually respectable share your opinions. So this isn't a strike against you guys. I want to get the negativity out first. But also, if you happen to also enjoy this video, please be sure to press one of the links in the description down below, and be sure to, follow me on any of my social media outlets. And heck, you can even share your list with me if you want to get your list to me sooner that way. So if that list's out of the way, I'd like to thank you guys for watching, the respectable ones, obviously, and I will catch you next time.